Hi, this is Alan from Wardale Community Church, and we are in a study about the will of God, and in a particular section about proving the will of God. And we're looking at the means. We talked about in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, we talked about how to prove God's will. I've been giving evidence that Romans 11:36, with the phrases from him, through him, and to him, applies not only to the way God demonstrates himself as the source, means, and goal of everything, but also these are areas to prove the will of God. The three areas of proving are the source, the means, and the goal. We've already shown that testing the source of things as from God was a scriptural pattern used by God's people to discern the will of God. Now we will examine the through him aspect, which is proving the means. What is the means by which I do the will of God? This is answering the how question correctly. Many things that are from God also must be done through him to keep that it might be in the will of God. So we're going to test the means, and we're going to look at verses related to those, and start in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15. It says, "Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So then do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. One has to be careful in the way one lives, either by being wise or unwise." This idea of walking is the way one lives or patterns one's life. We are to live a kind of way that considers that the days are evil, and we are to be seeking to do the will of God in the midst of it. The normal flow of these days are evil, and wisdom is necessary to navigate it correctly. The means to do God's will is not by being foolish, but wise. How do I live as a believer? The considering of how, which is the means, must be thought about properly if you want to make the most of your time. Your time is referring to the length of time that you have on earth, making choices, carrying out the good works which God has prepared beforehand. The will of God is to be understood, and what follows in our context are many ways to do that. Another aspect to look at first, and we look at 1 John chapter 4, verse 9. This is living through Christ. 1 John 4:9, "For by this the love of God was manifested in us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world so that we may live through him." The mode to living through Christ is living according to the will of God. The living by the world, the flesh, and the devil are the wrong three modes of living on the earth. Living through Christ is to think and act like him. Who am I living my life out through? Others, the world, or myself? Another aspect of this means is abiding in Christ. This is found in John 15:4. "Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine. So neither can you unless you abide in me." The means of fruitfulness is by abiding in the vine. The vine is Christ. The branches are the people connected to Christ. The question might be, who am I abiding in, expecting fruit from? A branch cannot bear fruit from itself, but gains by its attachment to the vine. So also a person cannot be fruitful in this life without abiding in Christ. The sense of abiding in Christ is to have a power and impact which is belonging to God and pleasing to God. It further explains in John 15:5, "I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing." Jesus is the vine, and we are the branches in this analogy. The one who abides in Christ bears much fruit. The abiding idea is an idea of continuing in a connection with the supply coming by means of him. The result of nothing comes by not abiding. How connected am I to Christ? Am I abiding or self-relying? Am I bearing fruit that is like Jesus? There are three ways to serve, and in 1 Corinthians 9:16, it points that out, and we'll note those as we read through it. "For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for I'm under compulsion. For woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this voluntarily, I have a reward. But if against my will, I have a stewardship entrusted to me. There are 3 ways to do your required Christian activities. I cannot do God's will, which would be put me in a state of woe. Secondly, to only do it from a matter of compulsion, sensing responsibility and doing it, but not always wanting to do it. And sometimes what happens is these are various aspects that happen in our life that sometimes we fade in and out of this compulsion, say, stage or this woeful stage. But the third one is really how we want to do all the things that we do. It is to do it voluntarily, which is referring to that which is rewarding. The rewarding way is one done for more than just feeling the compulsion or the threat of judgment. Instead, is characterized by wanting to do it. So what attitudes would characterize my approach to serving God? Not doing it because I have to, or 3, because doing it with a wholehearted willingness. So we keep in mind that the thing is that the means, those 3 means it talks about are one of the ways in which we're doing one of them in the way we're carrying out our Christian service. But we're going to look further at reward. The way to reward, one has to focus on how I do things. And we have to turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 8 to pick this up. Now, he who plants and he who waters are one, but each will receive his own reward according to his own labor. Now, Paul here is talking about him and Apollos, but he's really using them as an analogy. But he points out reward is according to each person's labor, not based upon the kinds of function one is given. Those with different areas of function in the same arena of service are working together, not against each other. Christian service is not a competition for reward related to calling and growth, but related to how each person carries out his service. Reward is not based on growth either, because God causes that. Reward is individualized and is related to one's own labor. The how you labor is the area left for you to be rewarded in. It is not because I am a pastor that I will be rewarded, but by the way I pastor, either living in the spirit or in the flesh, doing it in love or seeking my own. Some people are in a woeful state by not doing their calling and functions. Others are doing their work under compulsion, but all should be done with a fervent willingness, being fully in the service of Christ, and that is what will be rewarded. 1 Corinthians 3:9. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. God's fellow workers, here in the analogy, are Paul and Apollos, but extends to all who are working and belonging to God. And you can see that over in 1 Corinthians 4:6. The source of our being a worker is God. So the people are the field or the building in the analogy, which the workers are working on. This field and building belong to God. So these are not the evidence of our personal labor, but are the places we are to do our labor. The other workers are laboring with us and not in competition. 1 Corinthians 3:10. According to the grace which was given to me as a wise master builder, I laid a foundation, another is building upon it. But let each man be careful how he builds upon it. The way of reward must involve the careful construction of the means of building. The how you build determines the lasting and eternal value of your work. How do I construct my Christian life with a right motive or wrong motive? That's really what I need to ask. The building is done on God's building, and each person has to be careful how they participate. You've been given a family as part of God's building, then you have to be watchful and observant in the matter in which you are constructing. So this is the first part of talking about the means of proving God's will. Pick up the next one in the next video.